on this week's episode of the Autohaus podcast.
And that was the nature of what Project Car magazine was about. The whole concept was the privateer guy sitting in a garage trying to work on a car. Taka's contribution was amazing because of his extent of knowledge of the Corolla, not just the Corolla, but his extent of knowledge of how to do things in creative and innovative ways where you don't have the right tools. Stuff that you don't get to learn out of the manual. It's something that you don't teach you, but these are the little tricks and tips that you learn from guys that have, just made do with what they have.
This is the Autohaus podcast. We have another special guest. Could you say your name and give yourself a short introduction?
Yeah, my name is Koji Mori. I am a longtime Corolla enthusiast, I guess. Been in the background a lot, but experienced a lot and been fortunate to be able to participate in a lot of events and the history of the Southern California scene, I guess. And just glad to be a part and hopefully able to contribute a little bit back to the community as well.
Awesome. So how we got to know each other, I think you were the first one to reach out and tell me that you enjoyed the podcast, which first of all, yeah, thank you for your support all this time. And then you ended up sending me a digital and a physical copy of the infamous Project Car magazine. That's the issue with Taka Aono doing the SR5 to GTS conversion.
Yeah, I remember. So, I started listening to your podcast after you had done an interview with Taka, very early on. And I think you did that over at Willow Springs, actually at Driscoll, USA.
Yeah, in his trailer. That was by a happy accident that he just happened to be there and happened to have free time for us that day.
Yeah, so I remember hearing that, and that's when I started listening. And I thought, hey, this is pretty cool, a Corolla, focused podcast. And I had just started listening to podcasts recently. You were like one of the very first ones that I started listening to, and I just started listening, and it started by then you had already gotten quite a few episodes of content. So I was catching up, and I remember you mentioning something about the Project Car magazine, and how fond of print you were, and that was one of your memories you mentioned. And I just thought, oh, hey, that was that Corolla issue was kind of special for me too, obviously, because it was Taka and I working on that car. And it was something that, it's something that you appreciated. I thought it was just something like, a way that I can, give back a little bit. And, it's something that hopefully that you enjoyed and, perhaps can share with people that come to your shop.
Yeah, and I sincerely appreciate it. It hangs up in the customer waiting room every day. So we get to see Taka's face every day. But yeah, this Project Car magazine, another reason, because you might have heard on previous podcast episodes that I actively look for old, outdated, special issues of magazines such as these ones. So, to see this on Club 4AG, to see this referenced on Club 4AG and then to finally have it in my hands was great.
Awesome. Yeah. Obviously I grew up in the day of print as well, by a generation older than you. And it's one of those things I can't throw it away. I have all these old magazines and they're kind of like, yearbooks, right? It's hard to throw away something that you have such a fond affinity towards, and especially now because you can't get them anymore. So it's one of those things where I like to try and keep and hang on to, but I'm a typical Corolla guy that hoards everything anyway related to cars. So it's natural that I'm keeping all this stuff, and I just happen to have copies, and I know I have more copies somewhere else buried in the garage somewhere. So it's along with all my other stuff like my Terrain 11 magazines from Japan and my Carboys and my options. These are all things that I can't throw away. It is what it is. You just kind of have to find space for it, but it is a challenge definitely to manage everything, I think.
Yeah, I think the coolest thing for me now having the business is that actually a lot of new people I meet or new customers, I'll remember them like, hey, I remember your car in this magazine from back in the day.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
similarly, I think the biggest thing that struck me with this issue of Project Car, I think you told me that was your Corolla they did the swap on in the magazine.
Yeah, that's actually my garage at my house that we did the swap at.
Oh
So all
wow.
the pictures of all, yeah, that was my old house and the driveway that we did it at, and all the tools that we had that happened there. It's that was it, and it was not a shop build for sure. It was just whatever you had in the garage and the tools we had in the garage. So something that we felt, and that was the nature of what Project Car Magazine was about. The whole concept was the privateer guy sitting in a garage trying to work on a car, and how we got about it and documented it. And what's Taka's contribution was amazing because of his extent of knowledge of the Corolla, not just the Corolla, but his extent of knowledge of how to do things in creative and innovative ways where you don't have the right tools that, say, a professional shop might have, that has come from all his experience of just track racing, autocrossing, and doing all this, field side, track side repairs. And I learned a lot from him, all through, even through the Formula D days of how to do stuff to a Corolla that is cool. It's stuff that you don't get to learn out of the manual. It's something that you don't teach you, but these are the little tricks and tips that you learn from guys that have just made do with what they have. And that's what I feel is kind of very typical of the essence of the Corolla, the Corolla life, as you guys mention all the time on your podcast. So
Yeah, exactly. Where it's like out of necessity that we have to come up with a solution.
yes, and that's how it used to be. Like, I grew up in the time of the very early stages of the import scene, where really the only guys that were out here in the aftermarket was HKS and maybe Jackson Racing for the Honda guys. But the 80s scene was, there was not a lot of stuff available unless you were Supra or something like really high end. And for the guys that were driving Corollas or the low powered Hondas, it was a set of Mikuni carbs, and that was basically it. Maybe a set of HKS cams, but everything else was kind of like figure it out, make it, do the best we can. And that was a time when we didn't have all the tools that we have today that were readily available to garage guys. Like, people can, it's relatively easy now to get like CNC or lathes, mini lathes, or TIG welders, MIG welders, and all these high-end tools that back in the day when we were younger, it just wasn't available, let alone know how to use it. Like now we have YouTube and social media and all these people explaining things and online classes, but back then it wasn't like that. It wasn't that easy. So it was very limited. We only knew how to do stuff within our own circle of friends and that were, in the cars. And that was just the nature of how we grew up in. And you had to be innovative and you had to find different ways to fix things. And that's how we, survived through that period of time. And then all of a sudden the explosion happened, right? So through street racing scene, battle to imports, and all that happened. And it became a really huge industry now. It's totally different. But the days back then compared to now, it's, one isn't necessarily better than the other, because luckily now today we have so much available to us that we can work on our old cars that don't have parts available from the dealer, or, new parts that, fit the old parts, all the manufacturers that are participating now, all the companies that are supplying parts. That's a great thing too. So that's another resurgence I think we can see in the Corolla community coming forward.
Yeah, and hopefully we have more of that because I mean, I think that's one part of why it's a lot easier to be a Corolla owner now is because I'm sure you've heard there's plenty of owners on my podcast where they may be the one or two guys in their immediate area who have this car or even know what this car is, and yet they're still able to buy parts and like maintain the vehicle because of these times with the internet and social.
Yeah, and the relationships that you can create long distance to be able to get that help. Recently on your podcast, I noticed that you're getting a lot of like long distance type of podcasts, or guests, coming from overseas, even UK, East Coast or, wherever. And some of these guys, I remember hearing that, they're like one of like a handful of people in the area, compared to like Southern California or NorCal, where we have like, tons of Corolla guys relatively that, get together and hang out and know each other. The community is a lot stronger here, but they're able to participate too, right? Obviously. And that's really cool that, they have the ability to be able to join in that community, even from a long distance or remote areas, and enjoy the car, so how it is, and still keep going, with the car, where before it would have been very, very difficult for sure.
Definitely. So one thing I want to focus this episode on is this particular issue of Project Car Magazine, because first of all, 2010, so this is 10 years ago, and this is unfortunate. I think as a new Corolla owner, this is going to be like lost on you, like how important this magazine was for us. 2010, that was like, still the heyday of Club 4AG. So yeah, I'd really like to know about like your involvement with the magazine, and then like the whole process. I knew this was your car. I didn't realize this was like at your house too.
Yeah, that was the whole concept, kind of like how to do it in the garage, and again, to leverage Taka's knowledge and get his feedback and kind of see how he could share some of his tips and tricks with, in general, anybody that's trying to tackle that conversion, because there's a lot of things, there's a lot of people that do the SR5 conversion, and they all think it's just, hey, it's just the engine, it's the rear diff and transmission, and you're done. But there's a lot of other details in the upgrade or the migration that is, not the same. And they'll never know that because they'll never really understand all the little details. And I think what that magazine was able to do was kind of document that in a lot more detail, pictures. And that was the whole concept behind the magazine and all of its articles that it came out with.
So what was your involvement with Project Car Magazine? Because I see you listed as one of the contributors.
Yeah, so Project Car Magazine was kind of like a quarterly issue, sub issue of Super Street magazine. So the editor of Super Street, or the entire entity of Super Street magazine and that magazine media group, produced Project Car Magazine on a quarterly basis, I think. My very longtime friend that I had met through the street races actually was Gary Narasawa, was the editor of that. And he reached out to me looking for content every once in a while. We would just talk, obviously, just as a normal course of friendship. And one of the projects that I had from, that was just sitting there and never, having built yet, was an Infiniti M30. And I had gone through all the research for it. And the Infiniti M30 is basically an R30 frame chassis in Japan. And I wanted to do an RB25 swap in it. And back then, Moto from Club 4AG had like this Soar that was kind of like the iconic Soar that, we always wanted, that two-door car, that Toyota that could never get here. And the Infiniti M30 was one of those cars that was available here. Nobody knew about it, and could still get I could put an RB25 swap into it. So that was the first project that I had helped them on and participated in, and that was built up, and it was in a previous issue. And then after that, we were still talking, and I just naturally rolled into another project. And so like, hey, how about your Corolla? And I was like, yeah, that's cool. It's been sitting there. I've been just tinkering with it. It's pretty much kind of ready to go. Just have all the parts, just need some time to put it together. And so we came up with the concept of, hey, let's work on it. And I said, oh, let's pull in Taka because, he'll be a great asset to the content. And we would get a lot more visibility to the issue as well through him. And, so that was kind of like how it happened.
What was your relationship with Taka Aono in 2010?
I've known Taka back since, the Club 4AG days. So I had originally first met him through Moto. And I had reached out to Moto way back, early Club 4AG forum like V1 days, when they were really, really slow and everybody was complaining. And I happened to be, my background is in IT, and I just happened to reach out to him and say, hey, if you need any help with it, just let me know. And surprisingly, he took me up on my offer, and I had helped him kind of do a migration of the original Club 4AG forums. So all the old forums that we lost, kind of like that people like really are upset about, that's partly my fault, I guess,
Oh
because
no.
I moved him onto like a new platform that was a lot faster. And this was the reason why, was because he was, that, like you said, it was growing at an exponential rate. I mean, tens of thousands of like members like coming into this really forum platform, the original forum platform that was not really designed for that. So what we did was we moved it over to a platform called RelyTech that was the same platform that Honda Tech uses. And Honda Tech was like huge back then too, right?
Yeah.
So we had moved to that platform and worked great, was really fast, and then something happened with that company, that hosting company, and had to do another move. And then, so that's how we ended up going through multiple moves of the forum platform. But I had met Taka through that initial introduction from Moto. And at that point, I was like, I remember, and that kind of extended into events, going to drift days and, participating and then volunteering and helping out with that kind of support. And that was where I kind of saw, like, for the first time when I was at the track, I was like, he was always there helping somebody out. And I remember that, I vividly remember this, some guy had a bearing problem and kind of prevented him from continuing on into the event. And I was like, oh shoot, he's done, right? He's, we don't have tools to be able to do to work on this. We need like a vise, we need like, all these tools. And, Taka just hops out, grabs a spare wheel, bolts on the strut to the wheel, and he says, stand on this. And, using that as a vise to break like all the nuts off and taking apart the whole hub and, replacing the bearing right there as a, like at trackside with a little toolbox. And, at that point I was like, hey, this guy knows a lot. And it's like, got to get to know this guy, and started hanging out with the whole, team there at Club 4AG and Drift Association. I got to make a lot of good friends and a lot of good memories with a lot of people. So that's kind of how I got, involved with him. That rolled into like, helping out with like, the first D1 GP USA, going to, and then starting the Formula Drift team and helping him out with that, with Yoshie and Hiro Sumida. So I've had a very long background, very good friends with him. It's been a very long time friendship that we've continued. And, it was natural for him to join that Project Car issue magazine issue article because, he's obviously one of the guys that knows all about the Corolla.
So take us from the beginning, actually starting the swap. What was like the logistics behind that?
Basically, I had the car and the SR5, and I had my original GTS that we used as a parts car. And it wasn't a parts car; it was a fully running car that that was my very first Corolla that I had ever owned, and it was pretty much fully stock, like completely stock. And it wasn't the prettiest car, but it ran good, and it was complete, adulterated. So there was no like extra pairs of hands in it and stuff. But the only problem was that it wasn't a previous accident, so there was kind of like frame damage. And what's critical about these cars, what I found was the foundation has to be, you have to have a solid foundation, to start working on the car. And especially if you want to do track use for it and things like that. And one of the things was, anytime after you do a frame repair, it gets kind of like, there's something always a little off. And naturally, even just driving the car, it's hard to find a car that's even straight nowadays, right? But especially back then. So what I did was I went out and I looked for an SR5. And one of the things about SR5s that I really liked was, no sunroof and just very plain and simple, right? The chassis is very unadulterated. And it's hard to like damage a chassis with only like a 70 horsepower motor in it, right? So it's not going to be abused. It's not going to be, uh, taken to the track, and it's not going to be beat up like a lot of the GTSs were. So, I feel like SR5 conversions are like actually a better platform if you're going to keep the car for a long time, because GTSs were typically like beat up, they were on the track, drifted, or something to that effect, where it's something where you're going to have to fix along the way. So the first thing we did with the SR5 was, I had stripped out everything in the engine compartment, interior dash, everything was out of the car, and did the spot welding thing, painted the engine bay, just to firm up everything in the car, just to make it solid base and foundation. And that was kind of like where I was at within the project itself. And the article starts basically from that, like, hey, we're picking up from a lost project, taking parts out of the GTS and putting them into the SR5, and step by step, what are all the differences, and putting all the unique things down into the article about what are different and what you need to do to be able to do that upgrade or transition.
One of the things I was thinking about, because I've gone cover to cover through this magazine a couple times and refreshed myself last night, was that a lot of this media work, like, because I do a fair amount of video these days, so I think people don't realize, you might shoot 10 hours in a day. You might shoot a 10-hour day and only get 5 minutes of footage out of it. So similarly with this article, I imagine there was a lot of back and forth, right? Like, like, oh, we forgot to take notes, or oh, we didn't take pictures, we got to take something back out. Did any of that happen during this process?
Oh yeah, that happened like a lot. So, I mean, there's like, as you know, like when you're trying to do like YouTube videos or whatever, there's stuff that's already done that either you need the content of you doing it, or you forgot to take the content of when you were doing it at the time, or you can't find the content after you did it, because at the end of the project you're putting it all together, editing and everything. Hey, where are all the pictures for this set? It's like, oh shoot, we don't have it. Okay, and then we got to take it all apart again, revert it back to how it was originally, put it all back in the car, and then take pictures as we're doing it again. So there was multiple situations where that happens, and that occurs all the time, when you're doing projects like this. And that happened on the other project that I do with them, and it happened multiple times throughout the Corolla one too. So yeah, that's definitely something that just part of the process. You do what you need to do to capture the content, but assume it's going to take 4 times longer than what it does just normally, right?
Oh yeah, of course. What was the other project you did with Project Car Magazine?
That was the Infiniti M30
Oh, okay.
build with the
Okay.
RB25 DET. So, the editor, my friend Gary, he knows like RV motors like crazy. He runs cycleperformance.com, which they sell like motor mounts for like RB25s and like downpipes. And he was the guy that originally started the RB25 240 S13 S14 like engine mount kits. And see, he had a lot of knowledge about the RV series motors, RB25, RB26. So he was really pushing me to put the RB25 into the Infiniti M30. And that was back in the day, that's kind of like the 2JZ day of what it is today, right? The popularity of 2JZ was what the RV swaps back then on S13 and S14, and that was when 300 horsepower was, an enormous amount of power and torque for for a car, compared to nowadays, where that's kind of like everybody's baseline. Sounds like, for what people want out of a drift car.
Yeah, times has changed in 10 years. I know I mentioned to a lot of people, like, today your Toyota Camry or Honda Accord has 300 horsepower.
Oh yeah, it's totally different. I mean, if we're lucky to get 100 horse out of a, relatively healthy, 16 valve, it's a huge night and day comparison to the family commuter car, the 4-door that sits in the driveway that can get you point A to point B a lot more comfortably, a lot faster probably, and a lot safer in a lot
Yeah.
of aspects.
What were some of the issues that came up during this swap? while you guys were documenting this?
I would say, a lot of it was just having all the right parts on hand, because as you're taking apart stuff, we would need to get like factory restoration parts. So like just like any other Corolla, back then was no different. When you take apart something on a Corolla, I don't think if it would matter if it was a 10-year-old car or a 30-year-old car. Stuff would just fall apart in your hands. And you know, back then it was a lot easier to get a hold of parts, obviously. You could just go to your local dealer and pick up something to work on it. But not just not having it ready to go was probably like it just killed your time, right? Like, so you're, oh shoot, I need this washer, I need this seal, or I need this or that. And it's one of those things where you're constantly trying to get parts for it and make sure that you have the right parts in hand to replace stuff. And that was probably one of the biggest challenges of trying to keep on time. Obviously media companies, right? They have deadlines and cutoffs and, hey, you need to do this and that by this time. And everything's crunch time by the time we get to what we're trying to do. And, oh shoot, we gotta fix this. Oh, we're missing the seals on the, like the injectors, or this is leaking, that's leaking. After we take it apart and put it back together, it doesn't work the same. Hey, what's going on? That, and I guess maybe the process of making sure all the photos and everything were kept track of, right? And finding out later in editing, oh shoot, we forgot to take pictures of this, or we lost the pictures for this. Where's the content for all this? Where are all my notes for this? And having to go back and, that was really frustrating. Like we mentioned before, was, having to redo all the same stuff that you did just previously and going back and doing it again. But that was probably the biggest thing. I mean, tools, the parts I had on hand, like the hard parts I had on hand, but like the soft parts, I think was a big challenge getting it. Nowadays, it's even worse because a lot of it's discontinued. You don't get it. It's not readily available. Funny, the guy that helped us out on this project, Herb from Cave Toyotas, I still talk to him too. He's still involved in the community. He's a good contact for us. And so it's funny how like a lot of the contacts that are in the issue, they're still around, just all a little bit more older and wiser, I guess.
Yeah, I noticed there's that Corsetta wagon, and I see that car still in Taka Aono's Instagram. So I think Hiro owns that car.
Hiro owns a TE wagon now, actually, a
Oh, okay,
beam
okay.
swap TE wagon. That one is a Jay-Z Cressida swap.
Oh my God.
So yeah, he's had that car for a long time too, and that's a really cool cruiser too. That's something that he's had for a long time, and I think he probably still has the Watanabes on there that we used to run on the Formula D Falcon AE86.
Another thing that I thought was a interesting component in this swap is that you had a parts list cost, so MSRP and street price. And one of the things that going through this magazine that was really like going back in time was the prices of stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, other than the retail pricing that you might see from like Cape Toyota, which has definitely gone up too, but like the street pricing stuff, I mean, it's crazy now. It's really incredible what they're asking for parts now, and I guess it's justifiable because the rarity of the vehicle now, and the parts are not readily available from the dealer. You can't just go buy bumpers from the dealership like I did. But nowadays, hopefully, I know the future is good. We got restoration parts coming out of Japan of like replica bumpers that are high quality replicas. So eventually, I hope it gets to the level of kind of like the Datsun community, where the 240Zs and the 510. I mean, I almost equate those guys at they're getting close to that American hot rod level of aftermarket support. With all the parts that are available now. I mean, brand new dashes and like interior parts, gauge. If the AE86 can get to that level, I think we'll be in good shape.
Yeah, I'm definitely hopeful and optimistic for the future too. There's a comparison people make for classic cars sometimes where like the 60s Mustang, you could build your own 60s Mustang out of the Summit Racing catalog. And
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
even the frame, it's a frame up build. You could buy everything brand new, basically. That's, we're very far away from that, but a lot of the parts that we're trying to do, like I just started working on the car again, maybe about last year, trying to make it more streetable and comfortable to drive so I can drive it more often. But, because we had stripped out everything and just bare bones swapped it, there was nothing in it to make it, no creature comforts at all. So no AC, no power steering, no nothing. And, I tried driving it for a week, and the mistake I made was that week happened to be in the summer, and I was miserable. I said, I'm going to drive this car for 1 week straight, daily drive it, get it out of the garage. And it ran fine. Everything was fine. It's just I was miserable because I couldn't park it in the mall or whatever I was trying to park, because the power steering was so heavy, and I was, too weak to park it. And I was 98 degrees outside, and I was dying because I couldn't roll down the windows, get out of the car, walk over to the passenger seat or passenger side, roll down the window, all that kind of stuff was like just really irritating. And I kind of figured out, like, okay, if I'm really serious about this, I got to start putting back in all the creature comforts. And unfortunately, when I went to go look for all those parts that I had stripped out of the car, they were probably lost, thrown away, scrapped, given away, or, I don't know what happened to them, but I didn't have a lot of the stuff anymore. So I had to go out and source all these parts again and find people that happen to have it. And luckily, through friends and the old community contacts and, Club 4AG guys, I was able to put together a whole kit of everything that I needed to be able to start working on putting stuff back. And that process was incredibly painful, and, I realized that, hey, I need to try and do, like, what do I need first? And the first thing was, I was thinking, like, I want to be able to roll down my windows. So I said power windows. I was looking for power windows. And, I just happened to find a guy that had a set of doors for power windows. So I stripped those down, put that in, drove it around for a while, and realized it's still not very comfortable. Even though you can roll down the window, it's still kind of hot, right? And while I had the windows, I put in the locks, the power door locks, and then I said, and it's still uncomfortable to drive. So then I started I did an electric power steering conversion in the car, and got that working, and that's great, but it's still hot. And I'm like, okay, I can drive it and I can park it now, but it's still hot. So then I went out and sourced the air conditioning. That was probably the most difficult thing to find parts for, because GTS parts, just like anybody that has a GTS, it's unattainable to find like that kind of those parts. Everybody going out and looking at 10 GTSs, you're probably going to find one that has working AC, let alone somebody that has parts for it to be able to hand off to you that are kind of in somewhat decent condition. So I bought stuff from all over. I went as far as meeting up with people in San Diego to pick up parts and rebuilding everything. And I still don't have a full GTS setup. I have a kind of like a mishmash of SR5 AC and GTS AC parts put together, and I had to figure out all the wiring and how to make the SR5 AC controller work in the GTS. I have an SR5 compressor, which doesn't have the clutch sensor, so I made it a really basic dumbed down version of the AC to get it working. So, I noticed that, you're doing a lot more work on the vintage air stuff, and that's really cool, because that's going to save people a lot of time and headache of trying to source all these parts, because they're not readily available, number one, and they're extremely expensive when you do find one and you need that part. It's just not something that's the nature of how the situation is right now with the Corolla community. Is just there's not enough parts, and OEM original factory is just not available.
It's always interesting for me to think back, like the life cycle of these cars. Even in 2010, these cars were still relatively available. People were still using them as drift missiles. So in my mind, I'm thinking A lot of times what I've seen is when something doesn't work, it usually gets taken out and thrown away. So power steering and AC were usually those two things. Whereas fast forward 10 years later, and now that part of the reason I decided to jump into the Vintage Air project was, ever since the first day of having the physical shop space, I think like my very first customer, or one of my very first bigger jobs, he has a GZE AW11. One of the first things he asked me was like, "Hey, can you put AC back in this thing?" And that's been like a reoccurring theme now.
Because I think that's one of the biggest comfort factors of driving this car. If you're in Southern California, or even like if you're anywhere else, like the summer months are just miserable to drive the car for an extended period of time. So, just comfort driving. I don't even remember without AC. Well, that last week, that 1 week, a year and a half ago, was probably the first time I had driven the car like during the daytime. It's
Oh,
like it's usually driving at night, and because it's comfortable and you can drive around with the windows down. But in the summer, even at night, it's hot. So you want AC. And during the build, we had just done it to get it running and as fast as we could. So I had no heater, I had no AC, I had nothing. It was just completely gutted, other than the core GTS parts that we needed to get the car running for to get it on the track. So it was not something that was comfortable, and it wasn't a daily car. But back then, when you're younger, you don't care. You're not thinking, right? You're just like, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter. I don't need to have AC or power steering or anything. I'll just tough it out and be a man, kind of thing, right? You're a Corolla owner. You shouldn't need AC or power steering. Don't be a wuss. And, that's kind of like the general feeling it was back then. And now the feelings change when you get older, and it sounds like a lot of younger people are like that now too, since they want to drive the car more often and more frequently, and use it as a daily driver. So I really think those the creature comforts of like AC, especially, power steering is somewhat available, just because everybody takes it out and it's not a necessity. And the manual steering kits are available now from T3, and Flow, so it's easy to like get a replacement. But power steering is like really nice. It's like, and it's a nice thing to have when you're driving. And even when drifting, I know a lot of drivers prefer power steering. So it's one of those things where that's a nice thing to have too. So if you can get all those things back into the car, it makes it that much more desirable to want to drive it. And I think that's the key thing, right? I don't want to, this car is not some car that I'm going to sell down the road at all anytime in the future. It's one of those forever type of cars, right? So if I keep it, I want to be able to drive it. I don't want to leave it in the garage or be in such a pristine condition that I'm so afraid to drive it anywhere that I don't want to take it out, drive it to work, or go to the store or whatever. I think that's one of the key things that I'm looking at trying to do the concept of my build, at least for me personally.
I was about to mention about, again, the life cycle of these cars. So people who have owned them for a long time, such as yourself, as we all get older and we desire more creature comforts. And then also because of the substantial increase over the years of these cars, like exponential increase that the newer owners of these cars have typically shifted to be older too, right? Typically it's later on in your life, you have money to buy like a expensive classic, of course.
Yeah.
But one point that you made that I didn't really think about is that the newest younger generation of Corolla owners, so like early 20s, even their mindset has changed to, I guess, 10 years ago for me, where, I was, I'm a Corolla owner, I'm just going to tough it out and not be a wuss, right? But these guys want to drive their cars while having all the creature comforts, have the car like aesthetically, looking good inside and out. So I think that's an interesting, I would say, like, generational shift for the newest owners of Corolla drivers.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, look at what they're coming from, right? Most of these guys that, what we started with in my generation and the generation after me probably were real clunker cars. You're lucky to get like a first car that had working AC or power steering or anything, but now the technology has gotten so good that, these guys might be getting, their first car is like a 2010 like Civic that has, 200 horsepower and, bone stock with AC power steering that all works great and amazing and is comfortable inside with that's what they're getting as their first car nowadays, right? So I think the level of expectation is completely different from our generations where we're kind of used to the clunker and that's kind of like how we grew up. But the new generation, maybe, they get into that car, they get kind of disappointed. It's like, hey, I got a Corolla, it's cool, and look how cool it is. And they get into the car, and then all of a sudden they're like, wow, this is not that great of a car. This is worse than my, 2008 Civic that I just got out of. Why did I just spend an extra $10,000 on this car that is actually worse than my, $4,000 Civic that I just got out of, and I think that sense of disappointment happens because the level of expectation is very high for the younger generations that they haven't experienced that before, right? So they don't know. And you get some of the people that buy it and get out, because it's different. It's not what they expected, and they go to like a better higher end car that has all that, or maybe a newer generation, maybe the newer, 86 or something. But I think what we're kind of used to and what we know is the original AE86 is just it is what it is. We're not expecting to find a Corolla that has working AC, non-leaking power steering, that isn't bent when you try and put on a bumper. The holes don't line up. It makes a lot of noise and creaks all over the place. And to us, that's kind of normal, right? That's the character of the car. But and I've had like 2000, like an EM1 Civic, and it's like night and day between the two cars. But you can't compare the two, right? It's 15 years of difference of generation of technology improvements that the cars came out with. So they're two different things to compare. You can't compare the two, I feel. But because of the popularity of kind of like the nostalgic cars that are coming, the surge, obviously, AE86 is iconic. The Datsun examples are the same way. The 240Z was always my thing. I loved that car and I always wanted that car. It's just always priced out of my range that I could buy it. So I think we're still getting that $10,000 car for a reasonable GTS. I think is the market price probably right around nowadays. I'm not sure, but that's somewhat within the range of some of the younger guys being able to buy that car. But that $10,000 GTS is not going to be really worth $10,000 in like a normal technology car, I think, if you could try and compare the two. So might have some disappointments and some, unfulfilled expectations if you're going into it without that prior knowledge, I think.
Yeah, you made another really good point about expectations, because I remember my early days working at the dealership, and old timers would tell me stories of back in the day, you could buy a car without AC and have it as a dealer option add-on, or like, power windows and power door locks. That was a serious luxury in that era. Whereas now, like, all that stuff is standard, right? It's hard to find a car that doesn't come with AC or doesn't have, power door locks.
Yeah, and it's so much more complicated nowadays too, right? Because everything post, I forgot, whatever, 1980 whatever, when they went to CAN bus 2 or whatever, everything's integrated now. You can't take it out, because once you start taking out stuff, it starts breaking everything. So in the Corolla, we can take out anything we want and still run the car, basically, right? You could pull out pumps, you could pull out, the car can run on anything basically, just as long as you put gas into it. But nowadays it's part of the car. You can't take it out. You can't, if something breaks, in most cases, take it to the dealer, they fix it. It's warranted, or it's an easy fix, or it's a cheap fix. Parts are readily available. In the AE86 case, if it breaks, it's like, well, I probably can't find the part for a reasonable price anyway. It's going to have to be used. I can't go to the dealer. I don't need it. Yeah, and it just kind of sits by the wayside, and then it's just a second car anyway, or something like that. People don't treat it like a daily driver a lot, and I think that's what's kind of different. If we can get to that point, where like I want to get to, is I want to be able to drive it every day, reliably, comfortably, and get to that level of being able to enjoy the car more. Because I literally, before this past year, I maybe like a handful of times a year would be the car would get out of the garage, and I kind of realized that I was just like, this is not the experience that I want out of the car. I want to be able to drive the car. I want to be able to enjoy the car, not just take it out to a special event or a meet up with friends. I want to be able to drive it, just drive it normally, and have fun with it. Because that's what I remember, my enjoyment of being able to drive the car of my previous cars, being able to enjoy that experience. I wasn't getting it out of the Corolla anymore, because it was just sitting in the garage, either because it wasn't comfortable or it wasn't reliable, or whatever the case may be. I didn't feel like it was something that I wanted to get into at the time. Now recently, it's like, now that I have power steering, I have power windows, power locks, the alarm setup, and CarPlay, radio, all that kind of stuff it's great. It's still not as good as a current technology car. Like my AC is not anywhere near, and I have all brand new parts in my AC. I went, 1 to 10 and rebuilt everything in my AC system. I mean, new condenser, new compressor, blew out all the lines, cleaned out all like evap, new heater core, the whole shot. And it still feels like it barely runs, but it runs. And that's what makes it so pleasurable to drive now, is that I have somewhat of a cool breeze in the car now, at least. But compare that to my my Honda or my truck, that thing's like Arctic cold, cooling in a 2004 truck even, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big difference. The level of comfort makes a huge difference for what the incentive to go out and take the car out, I think.
Going back to the article, going back to the magazine, I noticed towards the end you guys went to work with Technosquare. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Technosquare was one of the sponsors for Taka during his Formula D days, and they were a very close shop. We worked with them and we knew them really well. Yoshie worked there too, so they were kind of like the premier old school AE86 guys. I mean, they're the guys our generation, even the old generation, looked up to, because both of the owners were, brothers, Watanabe brothers. They were like, old TRD guys. So, I mean, back in the rally days. So they have an extreme amount of knowledge of the AE86 chassis, engine, drivetrain, everything. And the level of quality that they had was really bar none. I mean, they were the shop to go to if you want to do any like diff work, for example. Like all the top Formula D teams would be going to them to have them do their diff work. I remember, from our team, Hiro Sumida actually beat Reese Millen in an event one time, and it was because his diff blew up. And ever since that time, he's like, "Oh, we got to get Technosquare to fix our diffs, because they're the ones that make sure the quality works, right? It's the quality of work is great." So it was natural, because of the relationship Taka had with them. We wanted to go there, and they did the diff work for the build on the COTS or the Tomei LSD that I had in there. so they put that together, made sure all the ring and pinion was done, and they kind of gave us the whole walkthrough of how to do it, right? So that was kind of really interesting too.
So being a Corolla owner in 2020, one thing that really intrigued me looking at your Instagram, and again, something we didn't have 10 years ago, is the advent of 3D printing. I noticed you have a lot of like really technical, really like innovative 3D printing projects.
Yeah, so kind of like mother invention, right, is really a challenge. And these Corollas, they have all kinds of stuff that are a challenge that you come up against that it's like, gosh, I wish I had a new part for this, and you don't have it. When I first started doing working on the Corolla, a lot, there was tools sometimes that you need, and there's workarounds for these tools. Like the first thing I think I made was a pinion driver, so for replacing the seal. I think it's like a 4 mil depth that you have to hit, and you can use a socket, a big socket or something to tap it in and get it even and nice and straight. But I'm one of those guys that likes to have the right tools. I've been fortunate to be around a lot of professional mechanics and fabricators and race cars, and once you start seeing stuff like that, it's like that's almost like you have to have it. It's that desire to like buy the tool, write the tool, do the job right. And even though I know I could probably figure out a way to do it, I kind of want the SST. But then the SST is either like hard to get, takes 4 to 6 weeks to order it, or it costs like $200 to buy it. So I just said, hey, maybe I can just make a disposable SST and just like print this out of like 3D printer, and it'll do what it needs to do. And I had tried it, and it worked. And I was really surprised actually that I could actually make a seal driver out of plastic. And it's made out of solid plastic, so it doesn't compress. And you hammer on it, you just make it thick enough so that even if you make dents in it, it's gonna still hold up and drive straight. But it worked out really well. And ever since I did that, I was like, hey, I started finding more projects to do on the Corolla. And as I started doing more work on like the electric power steering, I needed to find a 2.7 mil shim that would be able to interface the electric motor to the factory column, because that was the difference in space. I was like, looking for like exhaust tubing. I was looking for all kinds of stuff, and nothing fit perfect. And one of the really good things about 3D printing is that it can be super accurate. I mean, we're talking like 1/10 of a millimeter accuracy. So I can print out a 2.3 millimeter shim or a washer or something to that level, so that just fits perfect, interference fit even, and just make it fit. Just warm it up a little bit and then squeeze it in, and it'll fit perfect. And it'll mold to that size, to whatever you need it to do. So once I started finding that out, I started doing a lot more work with that. As you know, like when you work on the interior, a lot of the interior bits, once you touch it, it breaks because they're 30-year-old brittle pieces of plastic. So like the switch panels, I probably think like most of the GTSs or Corollas out there are probably missing panels, right? Because people, fourth, fifth owner, whatever, started working on it, didn't put it back in. So I wanted all those panels back in. So I started making panels to put those back in, to replace the panels. Little plastic parts like the screw holders. Like I just recently did one on the headlight, because driving at night, that typical bouncing headlight thing that just ignored the heck out of me whenever I drove the car at night, which is normal, right? It's a normal Corolla. You just got to live with it. It's probably the linkage, it's probably the motor loose or something. And I had just happened to like get some new headlights, and I took it out and I realized, oh, it's just the screw here. It's just a screw mount that the lamp holder is connected to is loose, bouncing around. So then, I just made something out of that really quick and put that together. But right now, anytime I run into a problem, I try and think of something that, it's like, come up with a solution, right? Is there something out available already, that people do to fix that problem or get by that problem, then try and replicate it in 3D. If there is nothing, then, you know, come up with something, you know, figure something out. You know, most recently, I had done a cam timing position. I don't know what you want to call it, gauge, whatever you want to call it. But basically, I was working on my new motor, and I took everything apart. I started putting back stuff on the motor. I was like, wait, how do I get the cam gears aligned when I don't have the backplate on there? I was like, whoops, where did, you know, I put everything back together without putting that back. And I was like, okay, this is not going to work. How do I do that? And I don't put these motors back together enough where I know. So, you know, a lot of these guys, they just do it by feel and they can just pop it in and go. But I was like, okay, I don't know. So then I took the old plate, I put up, you know, made a gauge, mounted it up, made it the same width or whatever. And, you know, just say, oh, I can just print something here. Cool. You know, and Taka, I think recently he's working on his motor too, and he's trying to dial in his cams. And his biggest thing was, you know, how do I get a consistent read off the dial indicators when I'm, you know, doing the timing for it? Because each time you set up the thing and you move it over, it changes, right? And you can't get it to fit in the right place every single time. So, you know, obviously when you're working on the engine, consistency is like really key to get the same measurements every time. Every time you make a change, you're reading from the same position, you're getting the same reading. So you know what you change is actually what you change in terms of can timing versus, say, the position of the holder itself is different because you moved it or you accidentally bumped it. So this was something that, you know, I'm working with him on to try and put together to see if we can make something that's more consistent, right, in measuring. So, yeah, it's been fun. You know, I've learned a lot in terms of 3D design. You know, this is just all hobby stuff, right? Just stuff that we can do on our own at a low cost and print at a low cost and potentially, you know, make available to the community so that, you know, they have something too that they can use and print, you know, inexpensively and use as well.
Yeah, one thing I'm grateful for being a Corolla owner in these times is how much knowledge and technology we have out at our fingertips right now, like 3D printing. And I'll give you an exact example is because the AC compressor bracket that I welded up and fabricated is actually off to get drawn up in CAD and then rapid prototyped in 3D print right now, which I know like I'm definitely not the tech savvy guy. So when I was building that thing, Grant at Battle Garage is far more tech savvy than I am. He was saying like, yeah, don't worry about this is just proof of concept. Once you make this, we can make adjustments in CAD however you want. And you know, imagine like if we didn't have this, I'd be how many hours I'd be there burning up,
Yeah.
literally like cutting and welding and making sure stuff is in line still, right?
Yeah, that's what, you know, and I still do that in 3D too. Like I'm not the best designer or engineer by any means. So I do a lot of printing and mock-up, measuring, seeing how far I'm off, and then making my adjustments, right? The guys that know how to do this stuff professionally, I'm sure they just know you give them spec and they build it for you, right? And it's designed, it's ready to go, and first production run's perfect. You know, my stuff is like, oh, it's a little off here. You know, it's, I got a few more degrees to the right and get it, you know, line it up a little bit. So I've kind of given up on trying to make it perfect the first time. I just try and get something rough out as fast as possible so that I can mock it up, test it, see where I'm off, adjust the diagram, adjust the 3D drawings, and then reprint it again. So I go through multiple iterations of my stuff too. And it's, you know, how you do it doesn't really matter. You know, we used to do that before all of this, like you said, you know, you would have to make probably like 4 or 5 different brackets to make it work just the way you want it eventually. But, you know, luckily today it's a lot less expensive, it's faster and easier, obviously, to just do it in 3D. So the times have definitely been helpful when you're doing something new and innovative like that. You know, it's important to be able to utilize the tools that are available to us now.
Definitely. So we are a little past our 1 hour mark. Did you have any questions you want to bring up to me or any last topics before we wrap up the podcast?
No, I mean, just I'm really happy to be a part of the community and been a part of the community and seeing kind of like what I feel to me is like the newer generation, like yourself, and even the newer generation after you, kind of bringing back the Corolla as as a car that they want to start restoring and working on has been really inspiring. It's like something that made me get back into it too, instead of just leaving in the garage. And so a lot more projects that have popped up now, but whatever I have in my spare time, it's been able to really get into it. And it's good to see a lot of companies too getting involved, like Battle Garage, T3, and all the other guys that are JSP getting back into it and doing a lot more Corolla stuff for the community. And it looks like it has a bright future. We'll see how it goes, and hopefully it's something that we can all benefit from working together.
I agree. And with that being said, one more question came up into my mind. So, with you being so involved in these cars over the years, and then plus in, professional levels of motorsports, what do you think we can do as just an everyday person or as a consumer to convince Toyota to start doing reproduction AE86 parts again?
They just started doing the Supra stuff, right? I think recently they announced that. I think the Corolla is just as iconic in Japan as it is here in the US. For us, it's just really developing the market, I think, is key. It's the one thing about Japan is that they move in their own they're in their own world almost, right? You still have Toyota out here in the US, but Japan's like it's an island, and they think like that too a lot of times, even though it's a global company. So the market there is very strong compared to us, at least in the Corolla market. So even though Corollas are big to us, I'm not sure how big of an actual impact it has to Toyota in general, right? The Supra is obviously a high ticket, high dollar item, and maybe that's the thing, right? Showing support by buying parts, or but the problem is it's hard to show support for parts that are discontinued, right? And we're not able to get a hold of. We want to buy it, but we can't buy it. I'm not sure. I mean, Toyota's a very traditional company. I've worked with them in other aspects of my job, and they're not the most grassroots type of orientated company. It's still going to come down to dollars and cents for them too, market share and such. But the one thing that we have going for us is that AE86 has a very strong following in Japan. It's an iconic car in both countries, although it's globally. So we do have that chance. What can we do? I'm not really sure. That's a really good question. Right now, I think in the near term, I think our focus should be supporting the small businesses that are going and trying to support our market, number one, because that's what's going to help us get through the next 5 years, I think, right? And then if the car reaches that classic status in Japan, maybe they'll do that, for the next 86 release. And they'll come out and they say, oh, we're going to release at the same time all the resto parts for AE86s now too, kind of like what they did for the Supra. So that would be my hope, I think, and being able to keep the community alive by supporting all the local small businesses, like yourself, doing the vintage era stuff, or all the resto parts from Battle Garage, or the aftermarket parts from T3, all the the CNC parts that JSP is putting out. These are the things that if we support the community, I think we can show that there is a community that is a potential market for them. And then hopefully they'll kind of get on board too and back us up with the factory stuff. So, it's hard to move the needle for Toyota, right? Because they're such a big organization, and there's only so much that we as a small community can do. But so at the very least, I think is to help out the current guys that are doing it right now and maintain the community so that we can grow it a little bit.
Very well said, and I completely agree. Yeah, Koji, I just want to thank you again for everything. I mean, thanks for the support. I mean, thanks for sending me the magazine that I've been lusting after for the past 10 years. And yeah, I mean, thank you for being on the podcast again also.
Yeah, well, thank you. It was a pleasure on my side as well. And, I really wanted to be able to go out and meet you one of these days. And hopefully that'll be a road trip that I can make when I feel confident enough that I can take that road trip in my car.
Oh, and likewise, like after this whole world situation dies down, we've been, all of us have been trying to do another like tour of SoCal. Like, you know, one of the big, since the interview with Taka, we've been trying to plan like a podcast circuit around SoCal. So one of the things is like Sport Car Motion is right next to JSP. Yeah, just trying to do like a whole media circuit around SoCal again. But
Yeah, that'd be really cool because I know you had your, actually, I was just chatting with Eric Teddy earlier today.
oh, awesome.
And it was, it was because of your podcast that I actually, placed the order for the zine, right? And then it was funny how like he was mentioning like how he wants to come out too to visit you, and it's like everybody's trying to come out and visit your shop now to get there. It's kind of like congregating at Autohaus, right? So that's cool that you're making all these relationships and all these people wanting to have a community that's not even just a local community anymore. It's a worldwide community pretty much is what you're building. So I think that's where it's been really interesting to follow and see, because it used to be like just SoCal, NorCal people hanging out together, but it's not just that anymore, right? It's a lot more people.
Yeah.
And that's what's really cool.
Well, I really appreciate it. That wasn't my intention from the start. I just wanted to talk Corollas with people.
Yeah, but that's it's cool. It's growing, and that's what's going to keep the community going, and it's going to answer that question, that last question that you asked of how can we make Toyota, see us. And this is a step in that direction to move the needle for them.
Definitely. Yeah, Koji, thank you so much again, and I'd love to have you on again. And then next time I want to talk about your motorsports experience or working in the industry, because I'm really curious about that too.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I mean, thank you so much. And then I hope you and yours are safe and well down there also.
Thank you. You too.